The scorching sun beat down mercilessly on Hope Emmerson's furrowed brow as she dragged her empty water pail through the dusty streets of Johnson City, Texas, her parched lips cracking with each labored breath while townsfolk turned away from her pleading eyes, all because of a surname she couldn't escape and a debt she never created. Texas, 1877. Johnson City lay nestled in the rolling hills of Blanco County, a town that had sprung up like a stubborn weed from the unforgiving terrain. The settlement had grown prosperous in recent years with the cattle drives and the promise of the railroad coming through, but prosperity hadn't touched everyone equally. Hope had inherited her father's small patch of land on the outskirts of town after his passing 3 months prior. William Emmerson had been a decent man, hardworking and honest, but rumors about gambling debts and whispers of dishonesty had followed him to his grave. Hope hadn't believed any of it. Her father had struggled, yes, but he'd never cheated a soul. The problem was that Johnson City believed otherwise. As she approached the town well, her throat ached with thirst. 2 days without proper water had left her dizzy and desperate. Her own well had run dry the week before, and the small creek that ran through her property had dried up in the relentless summer heat. She had nowhere else to turn. "Excuse me," she said, approaching the gathering of women at the well. "May I please draw some water?" The chatter ceased. Mrs. Patterson, the banker's wife, stepped forward, her chin held high. "This well is for tax-paying citizens of Johnson City, Miss Emmerson." "I am a tax-paying citizen," Hope replied, clutching her pail tighter. "I've paid every cent I owe." "Your father left debts unpaid," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice carrying for all to hear. "Until those debts are settled, you're not welcome to town resources." "But that's not," Sheriff Daniels made it quite clear, interrupted Mrs. Sullivan, the mayor's wife. "Your property taxes are in arrears, and there's the matter of the money your father borrowed from half the businesses in town." Hope stood straighter, though her 24-year-old frame felt much older with the weight of exhaustion upon it. "I've been making payments as best I can. I sold my mother's brooch just last week to cover what I could." "Not enough," Mrs. Patterson said with a dismissive wave. "Now move along. You're holding up others who have rightfully earned their place at this well." Hope looked around at the faces of women she'd known her entire life. Some looked away in shame, others stared back with hardened expressions. None offered help. "Please," she whispered. "I just need enough to get through today." "Your land has its own water source if you'd bother to dig for it," said Mrs. Sullivan. "Not our fault your father was too lazy to secure a proper well before he passed." The words stung worse than the thirst. Hope's father had tried to dig a well 3 times, but the land had fought him at every turn, revealing only dry, unyielding earth. He'd spent the last of their savings on the 3rd attempt before his heart gave out. "Move along now," Sheriff Daniels called from across the street, hand resting on his holster as if hope might cause a scene. "You heard the ladies." With as much dignity as she could muster, Hope turned and began the long walk back to her small homestead, the empty pail swinging at her side like a taunt. She blinked back tears, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. She would find a way. She always had. The homestead sat on 20 acres of mostly unforgiving land, though her father had managed to cultivate a small vegetable garden that she had maintained. The modest cabin, weathered by years of Texas sun and wind, had been her home since birth. Now it stood as both her sanctuary and her prison. Hope had barely made it to her front porch when the telltale sound of hoofbeats approached from the road. She turned, squinting against the setting sun to see a rider approaching. Her hand instinctively moved to the pocket where she kept her small knife. The stranger rode a chestnut stallion, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the amber sky. As he drew closer, she could make out his features' strong jawline partially hidden beneath a week's worth of stubble, eyes the color of a summer storm, and a quiet confidence in the way he sat his horse. He pulled the stallion to a stop a respectful distance from her porch and removed his hat, revealing dark blonde hair that curled at the ends. "Madam," he greeted, his voice deep but gentle. "Name's Adam Turner. I couldn't help but notice your predicament in town." Hope straightened, pride overriding her exhaustion. "My predicament is none of your concern, Mr. Turner." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "No disrespect intended, madam, just offering assistance if you're in need of it." "And what would that assistance cost me?" Hope asked, too familiar with men who offered help with ulterior motives. Adam Turner's eyes reflected genuine surprise at her assumption. "Nothing but perhaps a meal once you're back on your feet. I've been traveling for some time, and home-cooked food is something I miss." Hope studied him carefully. He looked to be in his early 30s, his skin tanned from life outdoors. His clothes were worn but clean, and though he carried a gun at his hip, there was nothing threatening in his demeanor. "I have no water to cook with, Mr. Turner, as you apparently witnessed in town." Adam nodded, reaching behind to untie a large canteen from his saddle. "I figured as much. This should tide you over for the evening." He dismounted and approached slowly, holding out the canteen. Hope hesitated before accepting it, the weight of it confirming it was full. "Thank you," she said quietly, her throat suddenly tight with emotion. "But this only solves today's problem." "I'm a fair hand at finding water," Adam replied, gesturing toward her property. "If you'll allow it, I'd like to take a look at your land tomorrow. Might be I can help with a more permanent solution." "Why would you help a stranger?" Hope asked, unable to hide her suspicion. Adam replaced his hat, adjusting it with practiced ease. "Been on the move since the war ended. Seen too many folks suffer needlessly when a bit of knowledge or an extra pair of hands could make a difference." He paused, his eyes meeting hers directly. "And I know what it's like to be judged for things beyond your control." There was sincerity in his words that made Hope want to believe him. Still, she'd learned to be cautious. "You can look tomorrow, but I can't pay you for any work." "Wasn't asking for payment," Adam said simply. "Just permission." Hope nodded slowly. "Very well. I'll expect you in the morning, Mr. Turner." "Adam," he corrected with a gentle smile. "If I'm going to be digging in your dirt, we might as well use first names." "Hope," she offered in return, surprised by how easily her name slipped out. With a tip of his hat, Adam returned to his horse. "Rest well, Hope. Things have a way of looking clearer after a good night's sleep." As he rode away, Hope clutched the canteen to her chest, its contents more precious than gold. For the first time in weeks, she felt something other than despair, a tiny flutter of possibility that she quickly tamped down. She'd learned the hard way that hope was a luxury she couldn't afford, despite her name. True to his word, Adam Turner arrived the next morning just as the sun was burning the dew off the grass. Hope had been up since dawn, using a small portion of the water to make herself presentable and to water her struggling garden. She'd saved the majority, unsure when she'd have more. Adam rode up leading a second horse, a sturdy bay loaded with tools, shovels, pickaxes, and what looked like divining rods. "Good morning," he called, dismounting with fluid grace. "Hope you slept well." Hope nodded, suddenly self-conscious in her faded dress, patched in several places but the cleanest one she owned. As well as can be expected. Adam's eyes took in the small homestead, the cabin with its sagging porch, the withering garden, the empty well a short distance away. Yet there was no judgment in his gaze, only assessment. "Mind showing me where your father tried digging?" he asked, tying both horses to the hitching post. Hope led him to the 3 failed well sites, explaining what her father had encountered at each hard clay, then rock, then more clay with barely a trickle of water that had dried up within days. Adam knelt, taking a handful of soil and letting it sift through his fingers. He moved between the sites, studying the land with careful attention, occasionally producing a small notebook from his pocket to jot down observations. Hope watched, skeptical but intrigued by his methodical approach. "Your father wasn't wrong to try here," Adam said finally, indicating the 3rd site. "But he didn't go deep enough. The water tables dropped with the drought." "How can you tell?" Hope asked. Adam pointed to a stand of cottonwoods in the distance near the dried-up creek bed. "Those trees wouldn't survive without water reaching their roots. And see how the grass is slightly greener in that depression. Water's there, just deeper than most folks are willing to dig." Hope frowned. "If that's true, why didn't Mr. Sullivan tell my father?" "He dug most of the wells around here." A shadow crossed Adam's face. "Some men profit from others' ignorance, Miss Emmerson." "Hope," she corrected automatically, her mind working through the implications. "Are you saying Mr. Sullivan deliberately misled my father?" Adam chose his words carefully. "I'm saying that a man who controls water access in a place like this holds considerable power. Why would he want your father self-sufficient?" The realization hit Hope like a physical blow. The mayor's insistence that her father's land was dry as bones had led to the 3rd failed attempt, the one that had cost them nearly everything. "So what now?" she asked, her voice hardened with fresh determination. "Now," Adam said, walking toward a different part of her property, farther from the previous attempts, "we find you water. Real water, not a trickle." For the next several hours, Adam surveyed her land, using divining rods and other methods Hope didn't understand. He studied the terrain, the vegetation, the soil composition, working with a focus that impressed her. By midday, he'd marked a spot approximately 200 yards from her cabin, near a slight rise in the land. "Here," he said confidently. "This is where we'll dig." Hope looked at the unmarked ground dubiously. "What makes you so certain?" "The lay of the land, the types of plants growing nearby, the soil composition," Adam explained, already unloading his equipment. "I've dug wells from Texas to Montana. You develop an instinct after a while." "And if you're wrong?" Hope couldn't help asking. Adam's eyes met hers, steady and sure. "Then we try again. But I'm not wrong about this, Hope." There was something in the way he said her name that made her believe him, despite years of learned caution. "I'll help," she said, reaching for one of the shovels. Adam hesitated. "It's hard work." Hope's chin lifted. "I've been running this farm alone for 3 months, Mr. Turner. I'm no stranger to hard work." A slow smile spread across his face. "I don't doubt that for a moment." They began digging, taking turns with the shovel while the other cleared away the loosened earth. Adam worked steadily, efficiently, his movements economical yet powerful. Hope matched his pace as best she could, refusing to show weakness even as blisters formed on her palms. By late afternoon, they had dug down nearly 6 feet without finding water. Hope's arms trembled with exhaustion, but she continued, driven by determination and the growing fear that this attempt would fail like the others. "We should rest," Adam said, noting her fatigue. "The water will still be there tomorrow." "If it's there at all," Hope countered, wiping sweat from her brow. Adam looked at her thoughtfully. "Trust isn't something that comes easy to you, is it?" "Trust is earned," Hope replied, her voice softer than intended. "And in my experience, most people don't bother to earn it." Adam nodded as if her answer confirmed something for him. "Fair enough. But sometimes you have to take a chance on people, Hope. Otherwise, you end up alone with nothing but your pride for company." His words struck closer to home than she cared to admit. "Is that what happened to you?" she asked, deflecting the focus from herself. A shadow passed over Adam's features. "Something like that." He climbed out of the hole they'd dug. "Let's get some food in us. We'll pick this up again in the morning." Hope reluctantly agreed. They walked back to the cabin in companionable silence, the setting sun painting the landscape in hues of gold and amber. Inside, Hope prepared a simple meal from her dwindling supplies: beans, cornbread made with the last of her cornmeal, and a few vegetables from her garden. "I'm afraid it's not much," she apologized as she set the table. "Looks like a feast to me," Adam assured her, washing up at the basin she'd prepared. "Been living off trail rations for weeks." As they ate, Hope found herself telling Adam about her father, about growing up on this land, about her mother's death from fever when Hope was just 16. Adam listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than mere politeness. In turn, he shared bits of his own story: his childhood in Virginia, his reluctant service in the Confederate Army during the war. Not for the cause, he clarified, but because refusing wasn't an option. And his years since then, moving from place to place, never staying long enough to put down roots. "Why keep moving?" Hope asked as they finished their meal. "Surely there must be some place you'd like to call home." Adam's eyes took on a distant look. "Home isn't just a place, Hope. It's people who care whether you come back at night." He smiled ruefully. "Haven't found that in a while." There was a vulnerability in his admission that touched something in Hope, a recognition of a shared loneliness she rarely acknowledged even to herself. "Well," she said, rising to clear the plates, "I appreciate your help, however long you choose to stay." Adam helped her clean up, and as night fell, he insisted on sleeping in the barn rather than imposing on her hospitality further. Hope provided him with blankets, their fingers brushing briefly during the exchange, sending an unexpected warmth through her that she quickly dismissed as gratitude for his kindness. The next morning dawned clear and hot, promising another scorching Texas day. Hope was already preparing breakfast when Adam appeared at her door, looking refreshed despite having slept on hay. "Thought I smelled coffee," he said with a grin that transformed his face, erasing years and revealing a glimpse of the boy he must have been before life hardened him. "It's chicory, actually," Hope admitted. "Coffee's been a luxury I've had to forego." They ate quickly, eager to return to their task. Back at the dig site, Adam descended into the hole first, insisting on taking the first shift with the shovel. Hope handed him tools as needed and hauled away buckets of earth as he dug deeper. By mid-morning, the hole was nearly 8 feet deep, and Adam's shovel suddenly hit something that wasn't dirt or stone. He dropped to his knees, brushing away soil with his hands. "What is it?" Hope called down, unable to see clearly. "Clay," Adam replied, his voice tight with concentration, "but it's different here, damper." He looked up at her, excitement evident in his eyes. "We're close, Hope. I can feel it." He attacked the clay layer with renewed vigor, and within an hour, water began to seep into the bottom of the hole. Adam let out a whoop of triumph that echoed across the property. "Water," he called up to her. "Real, clean water." Hope's heart leaped in her chest. She peered down into the hole, seeing the unmistakable gleam of moisture collecting at Adam's feet. "Are you sure it's not just surface water?" "This is groundwater," Adam assured her, scooping some into his palm. "Sweet and clean. Here, taste." He filled a small container and handed it up to her. Hope accepted it with trembling hands, bringing it to her lips cautiously. The water was cool and fresh, without the mineral tang of the town well. Tears sprang unbidden to her eyes. "We did it," she whispered, then louder. "We did it." Adam climbed out of the hole, his clothes muddy but his face alight with satisfaction. Without thinking, Hope threw her arms around him in a spontaneous embrace. Adam stiffened in surprise before his arms encircled her waist, returning the hug with gentle pressure. For a moment they stood connected, the shared triumph creating a bond that transcended their brief acquaintance. Then, abruptly aware of their proximity, Hope stepped back, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "I apologize," she said quickly. "That was inappropriate." Adam's expression was unreadable. "No need for apologies, Hope. It's a day worth celebrating." They spent the remainder of the day widening the hole and reinforcing its sides with stones Adam had collected from the creek bed. By sunset, they had the beginnings of a proper well, though it would take several more days to complete. Over the next week, they fell into a rhythm of work and rest, sharing meals and conversation that grew increasingly comfortable. Hope found herself looking forward to their talks in the evenings, when Adam would tell her about places he'd seen and people he'd met in his travels. She, in turn, shared stories of her childhood, memories she'd kept locked away since her father's death. On the 5th day, they finished lining the well and constructed a simple windlass to draw water. Hope insisted on being the one to bring up the first official bucket, her heart pounding with anticipation as she cranked the handle. The bucket emerged, full to the brim with clear water that caught the sunlight like liquid crystal. Hope had never seen anything so beautiful. "It's perfect," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You're the one who made it happen," Adam replied. "Your determination, your land." Hope shook her head. "I couldn't have done this without you." "Maybe not this exact well," Adam acknowledged, "but you would have found a way. You're stronger than you know, Hope Emmerson." His words warmed her more than she cared to admit, as did the pride in his eyes when he looked at her. She'd grown accustomed to his presence on her farm, to his steady support and quiet strength. The thought of his eventual departure created an ache she wasn't prepared to examine too closely. That evening, Hope prepared a special meal to celebrate their accomplishment, using some of her precious flour reserves to make dumplings. They ate outside on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in spectacular colors. "I've been thinking," Adam said as they finished their meal, "that well needs a proper cover to keep debris out and prevent accidents." Hope nodded. "I have some lumber in the barn that might work. I noticed. With your permission, I'd like to build something sturdy for you before I move on." The words "move on" hit Hope with unexpected force. Of course he would leave, that had always been the arrangement. Yet somewhere along the way, she'd started to imagine otherwise. "When do you plan to go?" she asked, keeping her tone casual. Adam studied the horizon. "I should probably head out by the end of the week. Been in one place longer than usual already." Hope nodded, ignoring the hollow feeling in her chest. "Well, I appreciate anything you can do before then." They lapsed into silence, the evening suddenly heavier than before. Hope busied herself clearing away their plates, needing distance to collect herself. What was wrong with her? She'd known all along he was just passing through. The next morning, Adam began work on the well cover, measuring and cutting with precision. Hope split her time between helping him and tending to her garden, which was already showing signs of revival thanks to the consistent watering. By midday, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. 3 riders were coming up the road toward the homestead. Hope recognized them immediately: Sheriff Daniels, Mayor Sullivan, and Mr. Patterson, the banker. "Stay behind me," Adam said quietly, moving to stand between Hope and the approaching men. The riders stopped a respectful distance away, the sheriff tipping his hat in a mockery of politeness. "Miss Emmerson, I see you've got yourself some help these days." "Mr. Turner is a friend," Hope replied evenly. "What brings you gentlemen to my property, Mayor Sullivan?" a corpulent man with small, calculating eyes, dismounted with effort. "Word reached us that you've been digging a well, Miss Emmerson." "Is that against the law now, Mayor?" Adam asked, his voice deceptively mild. Sullivan's eyes narrowed. "And you are," Adam Turner, "just passing through." "Well, Mr. Turner," Patterson said, remaining on his horse, "you should know that Miss Emerson's property is in arrears. She owes significant taxes and other debts to this community." "Is that so?" Adam replied. "Strange that a woman would be denied access to the town well because of alleged debts, yet you're suddenly concerned about her activities on her own land." Sheriff Daniels shifted in his saddle. "We're just making sure everything's above board, Turner. There are regulations about water rights in this county. Regulations that conveniently benefit certain parties, I imagine," Adam said, his hand resting casually near his holster. Hope stepped forward, unwilling to hide behind Adam any longer. "My father paid for water surveys on this land." "Mr. Sullivan, you told him repeatedly that there wasn't enough groundwater here to justify a deep well." Sullivan's face reddened. "I gave my professional opinion based on the conditions at the time." "You lied," Hope said flatly. "You wanted my father dependent on town water so you could control him, just like you try to control everyone else through their basic needs." Patterson cleared his throat. "These are serious allegations, Miss Emmerson, especially from someone in your precarious financial position." "Her position isn't as precarious as you think," Adam interjected. "The water on this land changes everything. With a reliable water source, this property could support crops and livestock that would more than cover any legitimate debts." The three men exchanged glances, clearly unsettled by this development. "There's still the matter of the back taxes," the sheriff insisted. "How much?" Adam asked bluntly. Patterson named a sum that made Hope's stomach drop. It was 3 times what she believed was owed. "That's robbery," she protested. "The assessment on this land has never been that high." "Interest accrues, Miss Emmerson," Patterson said smoothly. Adam's expression hardened. "I'd like to see the official records on that, and I'm sure Judge Harrington in Austin would be interested too. He's an old friend of mine, takes a dim view of officials who manipulate tax records." The mention of the judge, whether Adam truly knew him or not, had an immediate effect. Sullivan's confident demeanor faltered, and Patterson suddenly seemed eager to backtrack. "Perhaps there's been a miscalculation," the banker offered. "I'd be happy to review the accounts." "You do that," Adam said. "And while you're at it, review any ordinances about private wells on legally owned property. I'm quite certain you'll find Miss Emmerson is within her rights." Sheriff Daniels, sensing the shifting dynamics, attempted to salvage the situation. "We're only trying to ensure everything's proper, you understand. Johnson City is a law-abiding community." "I'm sure it is," Adam replied. "And I'm equally sure Miss Emmerson will be treated fairly from now on. Neighbors helping neighbors and all that." The veiled threat in his words wasn't lost on any of them. After a few more minutes of awkward conversation, during which Patterson miraculously recalculated the debt to a much more reasonable sum, the three men departed, their authority visibly diminished. When they were out of sight, Hope turned to Adam, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Do you really know Judge Harrington?" A slow smile spread across Adam's face. "Met him once at a cattle auction. Doubt he'd remember me, but they don't know that." Hope let out a surprised laugh, the tension of the encounter dissolving. "You bluffed them." "Sometimes that's all it takes," Adam said with a shrug. "Men like that rely on intimidation. Stand up to them and they usually back down." "Thank you," Hope said softly. "Not just for the well, but for standing with me against them." Adam's expression grew serious. "You stood up for yourself just fine, Hope. I just provided a bit of backup." They returned to their work on the well cover, but something had shifted between them. Hope found herself watching Adam more closely, the precise way his hands handled tools, the concentration in his eyes when he measured twice before cutting, the occasional smile that transformed his weathered features into something that made her heart beat faster. That evening, as they sat on the porch enjoying the cooler air, Hope gathered her courage. "You don't have to leave, you know." Adam turned to look at her, surprise evident in his expression. "The farm needs work," Hope continued quickly. "More than I can handle alone. There's the garden to expand, fences to mend, maybe even some livestock eventually. With the water situation solved, this place could be profitable again." She took a deep breath. "I could use a partner, a fair split of the profits." Adam was silent for so long that Hope began to regret her boldness. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle. "Hope, I'm not sure I'm cut out for settling down, been on the move too long." "You don't have to decide forever," she said, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. "Just stay a while longer. See if it suits you." Their eyes met in the fading light, and Hope saw conflict in his gaze, a longing for something balanced against a fear she couldn't quite identify. "I'll think about it," Adam said finally. And though it wasn't the answer she'd hoped for, it wasn't a refusal either. The next day brought unexpected visitors, not town officials this time, but neighbors from outlying farms who'd heard about Hope's new well. They came bearing small gifts, jars of preserves, fresh eggs, a loaf of bread, and curiosity about the man who'd helped her defy the town's power structure. Among them was Hannah Miller, whose farm adjoined Hope's property to the east. She pulled Hope aside while Adam showed some of the other farmers how he'd constructed the well. "He's quite something, your Mr. Turner," Hannah said with knowing eyes. "Half the town's talking about how he faced down Sullivan and his cronies." "He's not my Mr. Turner," Hope protested, feeling her cheeks warm. "He's just passing through." Hannah's expression turned skeptical. "Is that so? Because the way he looks at you when you're not watching tells a different story." Before Hope could question her further, Adam called her over to help explain something about the property, and the moment passed. But Hannah's words lingered in her mind throughout the day, causing her to study Adam with new awareness, searching for signs of the interest Hannah had hinted at. That evening, as they prepared dinner together, Hope found herself hyper-conscious of every accidental touch, every shared glance. When their hands brushed as they both reached for the same plate, the contact sent warmth racing up her arm. "Sorry," Adam murmured, stepping back to give her space. "It's fine," Hope replied, her voice unsteady. They ate in a silence that hummed with unspoken thoughts, both seemingly afraid to broach the subject that hung between them. After the meal, Adam announced he'd sleep in the barn as usual, despite Hope's assurance that the small spare room was finally cleared of her father's belongings and properly prepared for a guest. "Better this way," he said cryptically, leaving Hope to wonder what exactly this way meant. The next morning, Hope woke to the sound of hammering. She dressed quickly and went outside to find Adam repairing her porch steps, which had been rotting for months. "You don't have to do that," she called, approaching with a mug of chicory coffee for him. Adam looked up, wiping sweat from his brow. "Wanted to make myself useful, been thinking about your offer." Hope's heart quickened. And Adam set down his hammer and accepted the mug, taking a sip before answering. "I'm not much for permanent arrangements, Hope. Been drifting too long to know if I can be anything else." Her hope dimmed, but she nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "I understand. But," Adam continued, his eyes meeting hers directly, "I'm willing to stay through harvest, help you get the farm back on solid footing. After that, well, we can see where things stand." It wasn't everything Hope had hoped for, but it was more than she'd expected. "That's fair," she agreed, a smile breaking through despite her attempt at casual acceptance. Adam's answering smile sent a flutter through her chest that was becoming increasingly familiar. The days that followed took on a new rhythm as they worked side by side to revitalize the farm. With water from the new well, Hope's garden flourished. Adam repaired fences, reinforced the barn roof, and helped Hope plant additional crops that would mature before the first frost. Word spread about Hope's successful well, and more neighbors visited, some offering to trade goods or labor. The isolation she'd felt since her father's death gradually gave way to a sense of community she hadn't experienced in years. Even some townsfolk began to soften their stance. Mrs. Miller, the general store owner's wife, stopped by with fabrics and sewing notions, just gathering dust on the shelves, she claimed, though Hope suspected it was an olive branch of sorts. Through it all, Adam remained a steady presence, his quiet competence and unwavering support transforming not just the farm but Hope herself. She stood taller, spoke more confidently, and began to plan for a future that had seemed impossible just weeks before. And something else was growing alongside the crops and Hope's renewed confidence, a connection between her and Adam that deepened with each passing day. They learned each other's habits and preferences, developed private jokes, and could communicate with just a look across the dinner table. One evening in late September, as they sat on the now repaired porch watching fireflies dance in the growing darkness, Adam turned to Hope with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Sheriff Daniels stopped me in town today," he said. Hope tensed immediately. "What did he want?" "To offer me a job, actually. Deputy positions open, and apparently my handling of the situation with Sullivan impressed him." "You're not considering it, are you?" Hope asked, unable to keep the alarm from her voice. Adam chuckled. "Work for Daniels, no thank you." "But it got me thinking about staying in the area longer term." Hope's pulse quickened. "Oh," Adam shifted to face her more directly. "Hope, these past weeks have been different for me. Good different." He paused, seeming to search for words. "I haven't felt this settled since before the war." "Is that a good thing?" Hope asked softly. "I'm starting to think it might be." His hand moved across the space between them, hesitantly covering hers where it rested on the porch swing. "If there's a reason to stay." The touch of his hand, warm and calloused from hard work, sent tremors through Hope's body. She turned her palm upward, their fingers interlacing with a rightness that took her breath away. "I can think of at least one reason," she whispered. Adam's eyes darkened, and he leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. Instead, Hope met him halfway, their lips coming together in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened with months of unspoken longing. When they finally parted, both breathless, Adam rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the day we finished the well." Hope smiled, her heart so full it ached. "What took you so long, Cowboy?" he laughed, the sound rich and free in a way she'd never heard from him before. "Wasn't sure you felt the same. Didn't want to presume. For a man so good at reading the land, you're not very observant when it comes to women," she teased. "I'm learning," he promised, pulling her closer for another kiss that left her dizzy with joy. That night, Adam still slept in the barn, but something fundamental had changed between them. The next morning, they moved through their chores with a new awareness of each other, exchanging glances that held promises for the future. In the following weeks, their relationship blossomed alongside the fall harvest. Adam began courting Hope properly, taking her on buggy rides to neighboring farms and even to church in Johnson City, where they faced down gossip with united dignity. Mayor Sullivan and his allies maintained a cool distance, but with Adam by her side and her farm thriving thanks to the reliable water source, Hope found their disapproval mattered less and less. Other townspeople, seeing the positive changes in Hope's circumstances, gradually became more welcoming. By the time the harvest was complete, Adam had not mentioned moving on again. Instead, one crisp November evening, he asked Hope to walk with him to the well that had brought them together. The stone structure stood solid and true in the fading light, the water within reflecting the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. Adam had built a proper housing around it, with a sturdy roof to protect it from the elements and a bench where one could sit while drawing water. "Remember when we first dug this?" Adam asked, his voice soft with memory. Hope nodded, smiling at the recollection. "I thought you were crazy, digging in a spot my father had never considered." "Sometimes you have to look beyond the obvious to find what you need," Adam said, taking her hands in his. "I've been searching a long time, Hope, moving from place to place, never staying long enough to form attachments." Hope squeezed his hands encouragingly. "Then I saw you at that well in town, standing tall despite their cruelty, and something in me recognized something in you." Adam's voice grew husky with emotion. "I didn't know then that I'd find everything I've been looking for here, not just water in dry ground, but a purpose. A home." Hope's eyes filled with tears as Adam dropped to one knee beside the well, still holding her hands. "I don't have much to offer except these hands and this heart," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "But if you'll have me, I promise to build a life with you that's as steady and true as this well we dug together." "Are you asking me to marry you, Adam Turner?" Hope whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "With all my heart," he confirmed, his smile tremulous but certain. "I love you, Hope Emmerson. Will you be my wife?" "Yes," Hope answered without hesitation, joy bursting through her like a spring finally finding its way to the surface. "Yes, I will." Adam rose and gathered her in his arms, their kiss sealing the promise between them as the stars multiplied overhead, witnesses to a love that had flourished in the most unlikely of circumstances. They married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony attended by their neighboring farmers, and even a few townsfolk, who had come to respect the couple's determination and hard work. Hannah Miller hosted the celebration at her larger farmhouse, and for the first time since her father's death, Hope felt truly surrounded by community. As winter settled over Johnson City, Hope and Adam settled into married life with a contentment neither had expected to find. The well that had brought them together continued to provide life-giving water for their expanding farm operations. With Adam's knowledge and Hope's determination, they planted winter wheat and made plans for spring crops that would bring in enough money to clear the last of her father's debts. When Christmas arrived, bringing a rare dusting of snow to the Texas hills, Adam presented Hope with a deed to the adjoining 10 acres land he'd quietly purchased from a neighbor looking to move west. "For our future," he explained as Hope stared at the document in amazement. Room to grow in every sense. Hope's gift to him was equally momentous, though far less tangible. "We'll need the extra space sooner than you might think," she said, guiding his hand to rest on her still flat stomach. "Come summer, there will be 3 of us on this farm." The joy that transformed Adam's face was a sight Hope knew she would treasure for all her days. He gathered her in his arms with reverent tenderness, his voice thick with emotion as he whispered, "A family of our own. The greatest gift I could imagine." Spring brought renewal to the land and to Hope's body, her pregnancy progressing as steadily as the crops they'd planted. Adam hovered protectively, insisting on taking over the more strenuous chores despite Hope's protests that she wasn't made of porcelain. "Humor me," he would say, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I've waited too long for this happiness to take any chances with it." As Hope's condition became visible, Johnson City's attitudes continued to evolve. Mrs. Patterson, once so dismissive at the town well, stopped by with a handmade quilt for the baby. Sheriff Daniels tipped his hat respectfully when they passed on the street. Even Mayor Sullivan grudgingly acknowledged their success, though he maintained a certain distance that suited both parties fine. The power dynamics in the town had shifted subtly, but unmistakably no longer could a few men control the community through access to water and other essentials. Other farmers, inspired by Hope and Adam's success, had begun developing their own water sources with Adam's occasional guidance. In late July, as the summer heat baked the Texas landscape, Hope went into labor. The midwife was summoned, and Adam paced anxiously outside the bedroom door, his prayers mingling with the midwife's steady instructions and Hope's determined efforts. After 6 hours that felt to Adam like 6 lifetimes, a robust cry announced the arrival of their son. When finally allowed into the room, Adam approached the bed with reverent steps, his eyes filling at the sight of Hope cradling their newborn. "Meet your son," she said, her face radiant despite her exhaustion. "William Adam Turner." Adam sat carefully on the edge of the bed, one finger gently tracing the perfect curve of his son's cheek. "He's perfect," he whispered, "just like his mother." Hope smiled up at him, love overflowing in her gaze. "We did well, didn't we? For a couple who met because of an empty water pail." "The best things often come from the hardest beginnings," Adam replied, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "Thank you for giving me a reason to stop wandering." "Thank you for digging deeper than others were willing to go," Hope countered. "In more ways than one." Their son's tiny hand wrapped around Adam's finger with surprising strength, a physical manifestation of the bonds that now tied Adam permanently to this land and this family. The man who had spent years avoiding attachment found himself anchored at last, and marveled at how right it felt. Over the following months, little William thrived, his curious eyes and ready smile bringing joy to everyone who met him. Adam proved to be a natural father, carrying his son proudly around the farm, pointing out animals and plants with the same attention to detail he'd once reserved for searching for water. By William's first birthday, the Turner farm had become one of the most productive in the county. The spring Adam had found continued to provide abundant water, allowing them to expand their crops and add a small herd of cattle. They hired 2 local boys to help with the increased workload, creating jobs where once there had been only hardship. The well that had started it all remained the heart of the property, its water sustaining not just crops, but the growing family that gathered around it daily. Adam had carved their names and wedding date into one of the support beams, a permanent record of the love that had flowed from that unlikely source. On the anniversary of the day they'd first struck water, Adam and Hope stood by the well at sunset, their son asleep in Hope's arms. The Texas sky painted a spectacular backdrop as Adam slipped an arm around his wife's waist. "Did you ever imagine, that day I rode up to your porch, that we'd be standing here like this?" he asked. Hope leaned into his embrace, the weight of their child between them a precious reminder of all they'd built together. "Not in my wildest dreams," she admitted. "I was too busy being suspicious of your motives." Adam chuckled. "Rightfully so. Most strangers don't show up offering to dig wells for free." "What made you stop that day?" Hope asked, a question she'd wondered about but never directly posed. There must have been easier ways to help than digging a well in Texas summer heat. Adam was quiet for a moment, his gaze traveling across the prosperous farm they'd created together. "I saw myself in you," he finally said, standing alone against forces that seemed too powerful to fight. "After the war, I felt that way for years, one man against a world that didn't make sense anymore. He brushed a gentle kiss against her temple. But when I saw you at that town well, refusing to beg even though you were desperate, something told me you were worth fighting for, worth staying for. I'm glad you listened to that something, Hope murmured. Best decision I ever made, Adam replied with absolute certainty. Finding water beneath the ground turned out to be much simpler than I expected. Finding a home for my heart, now that was the real miracle. As darkness settled over Johnson City, Texas, the Turner family made their way back to the house that was no longer just a shelter but a true home. The well Adam had dug continued its quiet work, drawing life from deep within the earth, much like the love that had sprung between two unlikely souls, a love as enduring and essential as water in the desert. 5 years later, the Turner farm had grown into one of the most respected in Blanco County. The original 20 acres had expanded to 50, with orchards beginning to bear fruit alongside the established crops and cattle operation. The spring that Adam had discovered continued to provide abundant water, never faltering even in the driest seasons. Hope and Adam now had 3 children: 6-year-old William, 4-year-old Elizabeth, and 1-year-old James. Their home had been expanded to accommodate the growing family, with Adam adding rooms with the same care he'd shown in digging the well that had changed their lives. Johnson City had changed too. Mayor Sullivan had lost the last election to a progressive rancher who believed in fair water access for all. The new well ordinances, drafted with Adam's input, ensured that no family would be denied basic necessities due to financial circumstances. On a warm September evening, as Hope sat on the porch watching Adam teach William how to whittle a small wooden horse, she reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a desperate woman denied water to the matriarch of a thriving family and farm, the transformation seemed almost unbelievable. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Turner," Adam called, noticing her contemplative expression. Hope smiled, the years having only deepened her love for this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to an unspoken prayer. "Just counting my blessings," she replied. "They're too numerous for words." Adam handed the whittling knife to William with careful instructions, then joined Hope on the porch swing, his arm settling around her shoulders with familiar comfort. "You ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" Hope asked, leaning into his embrace. "If you hadn't stopped that day, or if I'd been too proud to accept your help." Adam's eyes tracked their children playing in the yard, William concentrating on his carving, Elizabeth gathering wildflowers with solemn purpose, baby James toddling after his sister on unsteady legs. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I remember something my grandmother used to say, 'What's meant to be will find a way.' I believe I was meant to find you, Hope. If not that day at the well, then some other way, some other time." Hope smiled at the sentiment, so unlike the practical man she'd first met. "You've become quite the philosopher, Mr. Turner." "Having something worth protecting changes a man's perspective," Adam replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Makes him look beyond the moment to what endures." Like the well they'd dug together, their love had only deepened with time, reaching levels neither had imagined possible when they first joined their lives. What had begun as 2 lonely souls finding common purpose had matured into a partnership that strengthened them both. That night, after the children were asleep, Hope and Adam walked hand in hand to the spring that had brought them together. In the moonlight, the water gleamed silver, reflecting stars that had witnessed their journey from strangers to beloved partners. "I never properly thanked you," Hope said softly, "for seeing what others couldn't or wouldn't see." "What's that?" Adam asked, drawing her close. "Value," Hope replied simply. In the land in me, in possibilities others dismissed, you look deeper than most people bother to look. Adam's arms tightened around her. I was just thirsty for something real, he said, his voice rough with emotion. And I found it here with you. As they stood together beside the spring that had transformed their lives, Hope and Adam Turner embodied a truth as old as the Texas hills themselves. That sometimes the most precious resources lie hidden beneath the surface, waiting for someone with the courage and conviction to dig deep enough to find them. And in Johnson City, Texas, their story would be told for generations, how a woman denied water from the town well found not just a spring on her own land, but a love that flowed as steady and true as the water that had brought them together.